have
This
Eric
conference will now be
Faisal.
recorded.
Oh, perfect. There we go. There's Dr. Ben. Hello.
Hey, there you are.
There we go. And Dr. Jay Harness, the
Good to
two of
see
you
y'all.
meet each other for the first time.
Yeah, Ben, hi. Jay Harness, nice to meet you.
And you, pleasure to meet you.
You bet. Are you still at Hopkins or where are you now?
No, last year I went to Vanderbilt because they made me an offer I couldn't refuse. So I like to say, turns out I can be bought.
All right. All right, very good. Have you met my friend Pat Wentworth yet, who's down there in your neighborhood?
No, who's that?
Pat Wentworth you're in Nashville, right?
Correct.
Yeah, Pat's probably in the private practice world, probably the leading breast surgeon in Nashville. Pat,
Oh, I'm sure I will meet.
Yeah, Pat Wentworth, right,
I'm
exactly.
sure we will meet in the next few years.
And so, Ben, have we got you involved with the American Society of Breast Surgeons yet?
Yes, because I have a lot of colleagues who are in that. And so I've been really involved with some initiatives. Some of my research interests is in cell-free DNA and looking at biomarkers to predict for pathologic complete response. And so Norm Walmark and people in Pittsburgh, Tom, why am I blanking on his name, at Allegheny Health.
Great. No,
Yeah, there's a lot of interaction.
Yeah, there's our annual meeting has a lot of academics now, and has for the last 8 years, like 5 to 8 years or so, from particularly the MD Anderson Memorial in New York and others, and so we generally get about in the neighborhood of 15 to 1600 surgeons attending, and we've got a big international turnout. So I'd really look forward to your participating there. And congratulations. What's your role at Vanderbilt?
So I have several hats now, and I'm co-leading the breast cancer program, associate director for translational research for the Cancer Center, but also director for precision oncology. And that's the job that really got me there, because this is something I've been trying to grow at Hopkins for a while now, with the focus on breast cancer, since it's so common, obviously. But the resources that they really gave me, and the vision of trying to grow this to help patients across the world, that's really where I just felt like I couldn't say no.
Hey, listen, that's what careers are all about, man. Take advantage of opportunities like that. That's great.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Sherry's just joined us, I see.
Hey, Sherry, how are you?
She's on mute. She's got on mute. There we go, Sherry.
Fine, everybody. How are you?
Awesome.
So tell me about Sherry. I'm not sure that I know Sherry. So
Sherry Ambrose, Dr. Harness, is the co-founder with Brett of the Male Breast Cancer Coalition. She's out of New Jersey.
Oh, great. Wonderful. Good.
Yes, so everybody meet each other. So far, we have Eric Paisala from Niagara Falls, right, Eric? I think he just went off mute. Or no, he's going on mute.
Yep.
Eric, are you there?
Having a little internet problem.
There we go.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep. And we have both Dr. Jay Harness and Dr. Ben Park on the call, Michael Singer, Matt Bowman, and Sherry Ambrose and myself. Hopefully we'll get a few more. Some were going to be a little late, but, I say we could somewhat get started just to open the call and get going, because we are recording it. So if they missed something, we can get going on it. But just a reminder, and I asked Dr. Harness, and of course, Dr. Ben, I'm going to ask you officially. We have our Male Breast Cancer Conference coming to Kansas City again.
Yay.
In April 23rd through the 26th, and we would love to have you as a speaker. Rick himself, Davis from ANCAN, is going to try to attend also. And there's Jamie. Eric and Jamie are on the screen now. This is Eric's wife. And so we're excited about it. We're going to have it at the brand new Lowe's Hotel, which will just have opened in downtown Kansas City 2 weeks prior, or actually by the Big 12, they promised to get open. And it's the most gorgeous hotel you'll imagine. So we want everybody to put it on their calendars. We want you here. Huh?
April what date?
April 23rd through the 24th. I mean, the 26th. Why am I saying the 24th? And we're going to kick off the Thursday night. If everybody comes in on Thursday night, I'm actually going to have you out to the house here, and I'm cooking you the famous Mama Burgers. Everybody can eat as much as they want, and we'll have happy hour and margaritas and everything else here in Kansas City, showing you our
I'm on
hospitality.
the 23rd, which is a Thursday, but I think I could come either late that night or the Friday thereafter. So
Perfect.
I'm gonna block
That
those
would,
off right now.
yeah, because Friday and Saturday is when we're going to have all the speakers, and then
Okay.
Saturday night we'll have the big banquet and everything.
I don't have my calendar in front of me. So Peggy, again, the dates are April
23rd to the 24th. And again, I'll send everybody 26th. I'll send everybody the link that's on the website
Okay.
after the call, so you'll get all that, and I'll update everybody, and I'll be keeping you posted. All right, is everybody on the call right now getting our emails when I send an email blast out, besides being on the Facebook page?
Yes.
Hopefully everybody's been seeing them. So
Yeah.
excellent. So we'll keep communicating that way also, and I won't let anybody down. But Dr. Harness, if we could somewhat start with you, and maybe you can explain to everybody what you're doing with Breast Cancer Answers.
Sure. Well, hi, everybody. I'm Jay Harness. I'm a general surgeon who has been focused on breast cancer for about 34 years. Much of my career was at the University of Michigan, where I went to medical school, residency training, and then on faculty at Michigan for 14 years. In the mid-1980s, we launched one of the earliest academic multidisciplinary breast centers, and my whole life changed at that point. Ben, my focus prior to that was the world of endocrine surgery, and Ben will get this, I'm sitting in a faculty meeting, and it was like, okay, we're going to do this multidisciplinary breast center. Who's going to volunteer? And it's like everybody took one step backwards, and I'm left there in the front. And Ben will get a big kick out of this in the world of academics. Anyway, subsequently was at Tufts for a couple of years, and then with UCSF East Bay Department of Surgery. And the last 15, 16 years, switched down to Orange County, California, where I started my third multidisciplinary breast program. I'm in my 44th year of practice, and I can say that I'm semi-retired since I'm living up here at Lake Tahoe and God's country out the window here.
Nice.
I started a fourth little breast cancer program in a small hospital in the Eastern Sierras to sort of keep involved. As I was sharing earlier with Rick, starting in 2011, Genomic Health sponsored the launch of what's called Breast Cancer Answers. And the website is breastcanceranswers.com. The concept was that this is an all video social media site. People would send in questions and we would send them back video answers, but then save the video answers in a library. Well, Genomic Health helped get us going and sponsored us, get us up and running. They just wanted a little post roll at the end of each video saying, hi, if you're newly diagnosed, blah, 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 check out our website, which we did. They gave us a little 6-month contract to see if we were crazy or what. They wanted 200,000 views of the videos out over YouTube at the end of 6 months, and we would be a success at that point. Well, we hit 200,000 views in 8 weeks.
Wow.
And at the end of 6 months, we had 3 million views of our videos. We then went on for a few more years helping Genomic Health out. They sponsored us. We also, for their assay in colon cancer and prostate cancer, launched some other things. All of this has been so successful. They said, toodles, see you later, guys. And so we still have the site. As I was sharing with Peggy and others, what I'm starting to do now is one-on-one interviews with experts. And Ben, I'm going to want to get your contact information and
Sure.
Rick and others to be able to do this. There's a very neat application called BeLive TV that you use with Facebook that'll give you a split screen and get up to 4 people on it. And we've already got 3 up there right now. on food as medicine with Dr. Gordon Sachs from UC San Diego. And then some of you know Andrea Leonard, who has started Cancer Exercise Treatment Institute. We've just started with her, and that's what we want to continue on doing. So anyway, that's kind of like who I am. I'm committed, deeply passionate about not only surgeon education, which I still do a fair amount of, but particularly patient education.
Great.
When Peggy was on with us on one of our interviews and said, GJ, you need to join this call, I said, great. We've interviewed Brett actually in the past. I think we did, it was either Facebook Live or Google Live or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Many of those.
Yeah,
Yes.
we've done a couple of those with Brett. I said, hey, listen, I'm not the world's leading expert when it comes to male breast cancer. In my career, I'm probably a little bit under a dozen patients that I've taken care of through the years. I also have a book, a paperback, and it can be also downloaded, electronic version. It's called The Breast Cancer Answers Book, co-written by myself and a 24-year woman, obviously, breast cancer survivor. One of the points that I make, and Ben, I really want you to chime in on this, is that breast cancer is this gigantic galaxy of diseases at the molecular level. When the NCI did their genomic atlas a few years ago, if I remember correctly, Ben, there were 830 patients that they drilled down on the molecular profile, and there were like 30,000 gene mutations, out of those. So I would assume that the same thing is true when it comes to male breast cancer. Ben, and let me wrap up here quickly and have you sort of chime in on this. And so what I'm excited about, and I'm anxious to hear Ben's comments, is the emerging world of immunotherapy. The Nobel Prize was won last year by an MD Anderson PhD on check genes. And one of the $64 million questions has always been, why doesn't the body recognize cancer cells as non-self and destroy them? Or turning it the other way around, what can we do to turn on the killer T lymphocytes to go after cancer cells and be the ultimate warriors? The other thing that I feel really passionately about is the importance of nutrition, the importance of weight reduction, the importance of exercise when it comes to particularly long-term survival from no matter what cancer you've got. But also we'll be doing more interviews with Andrea Leonard as people go through different phases of treatment. What exercises and what things can they sort of do? So do I have an earth-shattering announcement today about male breast cancer? The answer is no. Is there more coming? And am I more excited than I've ever been in 30 some years, particularly with immunotherapies and targeted therapies? The answer is absolutely yes. And the importance of exercise, diet, etc. So Peggy, those are sort of my thoughts, and I'm going to sit back and I'm real curious to hear what Dr. Park has to say.
Absolutely. And that was one of the big questions that day when you had it about exercise on, Dr. Harness. The men were asking, how much can we lift after a mastectomy, this, that. They had questions galore. So that's why I say this would be another next month, the following month, to get your exercise lady on to be able to talk about
we're going to do that. I'll get Andrea on very soon.
Perfect.
Peggy, if you're getting questions like that, please email them to me.
Excellent.
Okay.
I will do it. Yeah.
Oh, because I want a list of things that Andrea can take on. I mean, the short-term answer is that after a mastectomy, we need to allow the natural glue of the body called fibrin to do its job.
Excellent.
Almost all of us have drains in that literally suck the flaps down so that we don't build up a big seroma or fluid collection. Generally, we're talking in the neighborhood of 6 weeks or so before you're going to start getting carried away. But the importance, I think some of you can see, doing circular motions with the shoulder, Ben, you'd get a big kick out of this. I was in mainland China about 12 years ago making rounds and had given a talk, and I went up on the ward, and as you know, in mainland China, I mean, my God, man, the patients everywhere. In this giant ward, they were just doing mastectomies, had everybody in slings
Oh, wow.
post-operatively. And I'm thinking to myself, there's nothing worse than putting somebody in a sling. I was too polite to say that to anybody, but the circular motions of the shoulder, literally combing your hair, swinging a tennis racket, the one thing we don't want to have happen, Peggy, short term after, let's say, a mastectomy, sentinel node biopsy, axillary dissection, whatever, is to have the shoulders start to freeze up.
Yep.
That's probably the biggest thing.
Right.
Then one other quickie, the mythology about lymphedema. And you can't exercise with your arm, and you can't lift weights, and you can't have blood draws, you can't have blood pressures, you can't, I mean, there are more can'ts than there are cans. And that all goes back to Halstead's horrendous radical mastectomies. Were not, and in my early days of training, there were still a few of these around. Pec major, pec minor, all 3 levels of lymph nodes. And then you'd see these patients back later on with lymphedema. It was just absolutely horrendous. So we'll take on the subject of lymphedema with Andrea Leonard as well. Anyway, I've been talking
That's
too
wonderful.
much. I really want to hear what Dr. Park has to say, okay?
Absolutely.
Well, I'm flattered, and thank you, Jay, and thank you everyone for joining in. I think getting to your question, I think really relevant to this audience is the molecular genetics and molecular biology of male breast cancer. It is actually surprisingly still not really well developed and studied. And I think that's starting to change. And, to be honest, the Male Breast Cancer Coalition here has really been a big part of that. We've tried to leverage the fact that this organization exists so that we can actually get studies done. And Peggy and others on this call know that I've been part of a big group called the Translational Breast Cancer Research Consortium, and a colleague of mine, Sharon Giordano, down at MD Anderson, has really spearheaded this male breast cancer study. It started off with almost just a feasibility. Could we even get across 14, now 16 sites, enough male breast cancer cases just registered to say that we could even do a study? And I think along the way, we've made great traction into saying, both at the NIH and the FDA saying, you know what, you can no longer exclude men from breast cancer studies, clinical or otherwise. Yeah, and it's shocking to me that even existed. So I think that is a big, big win just by itself. What we do know of male breast cancer, though, is somewhat fascinating that we've learned over the years. As an example, even though the majority of men who get breast cancer have, well, I should put it the other way, there is an enrichment of BRCA heritable gene defects, particularly in BRCA2 for men who have breast cancer. But it's still the case that the majority of men who get breast cancer don't have a BRCA1 or BRCA2 mutation. So it's enriched, but it's probably only about maybe 10 to 15% depending on the study. So what causes male breast cancer otherwise? It's relatively rare. We know that estrogen exposure in women is a big risk factor, but we actually don't know all the parameters. We don't even really know what is the optimal endocrine or hormone therapy treatment in male breast cancer because everything's been extrapolated. And I think in some ways it's good and a bold move for the FDA to say the recent advancement, this was on your announcement, Peggy, of Ibrance or palbociclib being FDA approved. But again, that's mostly based on extrapolation. Even things like Oncotype, which you mentioned, Genomic Health. I actually have had a long history with Genomic Health and Steve Shack. They have some retrospective data of a few hundred men suggesting that Oncotype is in fact a valid test in male breast cancer. But we don't honestly know that because of so few or paucity of male breast cancers. So myself and many others now are starting, there's a big push at the NIH right now about trying to fill knowledge gaps in genomics. And one of the things that we're going to apply for and try to do, and this group would be perfect, we're going to try to figure out if we did a much more comprehensive genomic profile, and getting back to what you said, Jay, about the molecular genetics, the mutational profile, et cetera, if we did that, but did it on a larger scale, rather than just doing a cancer gene panel, which is what most of us are doing right now in precision oncology for metastatic patients, but do what we call whole exome sequencing, trying to find every mutation in the whole number of genes, the some 20,000 genes that we have. Also doing what we call whole genome sequencing, which means that we're actually looking at all of the DNA from patients, not just the regions that give us genes, but all the regulatory regions which we used to consider as junk DNA, literally. We now know that that was probably not the truth, and that there's plenty of regions in the DNA that actually regulate what genes get turned on and off. And then also looking at what we call the RNA. So our DNA is the blueprint of our cells, but DNA begets RNA, and RNA begets proteins. Proteins are the building blocks of our cells, which are the building blocks of who we are. We have about 1 trillion cells in our body. So our hypothesis is that we actually dig a little bit deeper, and part of this is that we're not only just going to examine the tumor, we're also going to examine the normal cells, what we call germline, DNA, RNA, as well as the whole exome, to see if there is something that accounts for male breast cancers. And we're also trying to, in some ways, this is almost ironic, we're going to extrapolate from men, but also to young women. Because young women are almost kind of in the same boat where it's relatively rare, they tend to be more aggressive, they're diagnosed at later stages. And so again, our overarching hypothesis, that subgroup along with male breast cancers may have some similarities that we can try to glean more information and capitalize on. And then also from that knowledge, obviously develop better tests for diagnostics as well as better therapeutic strategies to treat these types of breast cancer.
Ben, that's just absolutely spectacular. I mean, my hat is off to you completely. You said we extrapolate, and we do. And I know Steve Shack extremely well, and you're right. I mean, what did you say a minute ago? Maybe a couple hundred cases altogether of male breast cancer that they've done the Oncotype DX on?
Yeah. It's probably more than a couple. I think the poster that he sent me was about 400 or 500 or so.
Okay.
But still nowhere near the tens of thousands of cases that have been done now on female breast cancers.
Yeah. You know, let me ask you this, Ben. Should newly diagnosed men with breast cancer, should they be gene tested?
Yes.
Okay.
And here I want to make a distinction, though, between hereditary and tumor testing. Because I think, and our guidelines suggest this, all male breast cancers should get some sort of hereditary gene test.
Yes.
BRCA1, BRCA2, other hereditary cancers.
Somebody, Jim, can you mute yourself? Jim.
Wow.
I can't.
I feel like I'm in heaven.
Rick's gone, so I don't know how we mute him.
All right. Jim Tuffield or 000, could you please mute?
Jim?
I'm muted. Sorry about that. There we go.
Yeah, you got him muted. Thank you, Rick. Excellent.
They're just replacing the windshield on my car, so I'm running in and out. I got Safelite outside replacing the windshield. Sorry, Ben.
Ben, let's get back to what you were just saying when the music hit about gene testing. Let's be specific about what kind of gene testing newly diagnosed men with breast cancer should have.
So minimally, they should get the BRCA1 and 2 genes, and particularly BRCA2. But most companies nowadays who do this type of testing are doing what we call panel testing. So they'll incorporate not only BRCA1 and 2, but a bunch of other genes, some of which are called PALB2, BARD1, BRIP1, etc. What's important is that you sit down and talk with someone who's qualified to discuss these tests with you. They do require consent. They have implications because if you're a mutation carrier, you can pass that gene down to your children and or your SIBs, if they're your blood relatives, can also have those mutations. And there's an opportunity there that if one becomes identified as mutation positive, you could actually do risk reduction interventions on the blood relatives if they were also positive as well. It also now has therapeutic implications, meaning that if we know that there's a BRCA1 or 2, that cat was awesome. My cat used to do it all the time, Jim. if there's a BRCA1 or 2 mutation carrier that has metastatic breast cancer that is HER2 negative, one can now get drugs. These are drugs called PARP inhibitors, and they were first discovered literally about 10 to 15 years ago by Alan Ashworth, who's now the Cancer Center Director at UCSF and a friend and colleague. But these have finally been approved for breast cancer. And what we now know is that they can actually really make a difference in the treatment of patients who have metastatic breast cancer. And again, totally applicable to male breast cancer as well. So that's the number one step that you should do. My personal philosophy and what we're doing here at Vanderbilt is that really every metastatic breast cancer patient should undergo at some point a biopsy and try to get that tumor tissue for DNA analysis.
Absolutely.
And even nowadays, even RNA analysis, because we now have drugs. And even though it's not that common that we'll have some sort of blockbuster drug and a mutation that we can target, when it does happen, the results can be really miraculous. And getting back to what you said, Jay, about the immunotherapies, there are certain clues now that we know of that would tell me as the treating oncologist, this patient has a higher likelihood, or he has a higher likelihood of having a good response to these immunotherapies. There's something that we call high tumor mutation burden. And essentially all that means is if your cancer has tons and tons of DNA mistakes, there's a higher likelihood that you will respond to these immunotherapies. And so we've seen this. I had a patient back at Hopkins who had a very high tumor mutation burden. We don't often see this in breast cancer, but she got on a clinical trial from some of my colleagues who kind of really shaped this field in terms of high mutation burden and had a dramatic response for well over a year. And she was telling me, you know, nobody knows I have cancer. I'm going to work, I have metastatic disease, but it's being controlled, I have my hair, and I'm living a great life. That's, to me, a huge success story. And that's not something that I could have said when I first started in this business.
All right, let me jump in with a kind of a fun anecdotal story that, Ben, you'll get a big kick out of. As a breast surgeon, I'm sometimes referred men for gynecomastia, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And so naturally I go through a family history. So this goes back about 7-8 years ago. I have a textbook out actually 2 years ago on nipple sparing mastectomies and have a large experience doing this. So anyway, I'm sitting there with this gentleman and he's got some pretty obvious gynecomastia. And I said, tell me, is there a family history of cancer? He thought for a second, well, you know, my dad had cancer. Oh, what did he have? Well, he had cancer of the breast. I said, oh, really? I said, well, very good. Anybody else? Oh, Uncle Joe had cancer. And where was his cancer? Well, it was of the breast. Now I'm sitting up upright. I said, listen, is there anybody else that's got a history of breast cancer in your family? And he thought for a second, you know, Grandpa had breast cancer. I literally leaped out of my chair. I went running down the hallway to get a genetic counselor and dragged her back into the room with this guy. Needless to say, he ended up being BRCA2 positive, okay? So in my series of about 400 and some odd nipple-sparing mastectomies, I actually have one man.
Wow.
And I did bilateral preventative prophylactic nipple-sparing mastectomies. I think at some point there may be a role for that in male breast cancer as well. The difficulty with most male breast cancers is they're so subareolar usually that it makes it extremely difficult. But if the cancer is a little more peripheral, and we know by imaging studies that that margin is actually negative, what we've learned about in nipple-sparing mastectomies in women is that that subareolar margin being negative is like any other margin that at the time of mastectomy. So there may be a small future for nipple-sparing mastectomies, maybe in men, particularly if we can go to neoadjuvant therapies or whatever. But the bottom line of this story is that any man who has gynecomastia, we should be asking their family history about breast cancer, pancreatic cancer, or other things that would suggest BRCA positivity, and B, really work them up thoroughly, et cetera, et cetera.
Just so everyone on the call understands, gynecomastia is actually when men develop more breast tissue. And it actually, you know, I can say it with this audience because we're all friends and you say it, but some people refer to them as man boobs.
Right.
But these are men who you really see like have breasts, like more prominent breasts than what men generally have.
Yeah, and there's actually glandular tissue, gentlemen, and Peggy, that and Cherry, that grow there. It's from typically a hormonal imbalance or from medications. And particularly among people who drink too much and you get too much endogenous estrogen. We always do. I don't know how many mammograms I've done on male gynecomastia patients on that off chance that we're dealing with a cancer, but they do need to be properly worked up. So anyway, Ben, I'm excited about what you had to say. I mean, I think it's really exciting. Yeah.
I just jump in for Dr. Park, can you clarify for these gentlemen the difference between germline and somatic testing? Because there is a lot of confusion, and I know that you were referring mainly to germline, but I think it would be helpful.
So I'm doing both, especially nowadays. In fact, I used to work more with what we call somatic. So that's a great question. And so, Rick, I thank you for asking that. When we talk about all cancers, they are all a disease of DNA gone bad, meaning that what I was saying earlier, that DNA is the blueprint of who we are because it encodes for RNA, encodes for protein, encodes for cells. But it takes probably anywhere from 3 to 8 DNA mistakes to go from a normal cell all the way to a cancer cell. Now, there are many ways that we get to normal to cancer, but you got to get those DNA mistakes in there somehow. Most of those mistakes happen just in the cell that's destined to become the cancer. And if you think about it, it's a little bit random and it requires time. If you have one cell that gets a mistake, a DNA mutation, it's got to divide a bit and become a big enough population that within that population, a second mutation occurs, and that gives it an advantage and it grows and becomes the dominant population. That's what we call the clonal expansion theory. And that's how you get cancer. Now, there are some cases where there's hereditary forms, and this is the so-called BRCA1 and BRCA2 for most hereditary breast and ovarian cancer syndromes. And we now know that BRCA2 is also involved with male breast cancers mostly, with some pancreatic cancers and some other, and prostate cancers. So here's the difference. You actually inherit half your DNA from mom and half from dad. When you're a carrier of a mutation, every single cell in your body already has one DNA mistake. And that accelerates the process by about a decade on average. It doesn't mean everyone who's a carrier is going to get cancer, though, because you still need to get those other 3 to 8 mutations in order to become a cancer. But it increases the likelihood because you've already got, if you're a carrier, every single cell in your body with one mistake. It's like, in a perverse way, it's like getting a head start or a lead start on the rest of the field in order to become a cancer. And that's the difference. And that's why if you get tested for germline DNA, germline meaning that this is heritable DNA, it's in every single cell in your body, because sperm and eggs only have half our DNA, there's a 50-50 chance we can pass it down to our kids. And so that's what germline DNA is. And so when we do germline testing, we take it from blood usually, and we take the blood cells, which have the DNA, the normal DNA, and we sequence those and we find out, hey, are you a carrier? You can also use cheek swabs. You could use skin fibroblasts. We've even used fingernails in the past, or eyebrow plucks. Wow. But this is normal DNA that we want to see if you actually have a mutation that's heritable that gives you this head start. On the other hand, if you take a tumor out, grind it up, get the DNA, you're looking at all the DNA mistakes in that tumor. The problem with that is if you just do the tumor and stop there, and this is what a lot of companies do, you can't tell if that's normal, meaning that it's in every single cell in the body because you're just looking at tumor, or is it just in the tumor? So what a lot of companies now are gravitating to is that they'll do not only the tumor, they'll take a tube of blood or a cheek swab or saliva sample, and they'll sequence both. And then they filter out and subtract out what is just in your tumor. We call those somatic mutations. and if there's anything in your normal, i.e., again, germline DNA sequencing. And again, in the past, germline was more about, hey, do you have a carrier gene that you could pass on to your kids, to your blood relatives have it? But as of last year, we now have 2 drugs that are approved for BRCA1 and 2 related breast cancers. So it now has therapeutic implications, and a study that just got published from our lab, we wanted to really put this to the test. Jay, I know you know this from the American Breast Surgical Societies, that there's a push that we should just test everyone with breast cancer.
Yeah, that is
guidelines are too restrictive. And we put that to the test for metastatic patients, because most of the tests that did this in an unrestricted way or unbiased way was in early stage. We actually found in metastatic, it mirrors this. You can find about twice as many carrier germline mutations in breast cancer patients if you don't follow the guidelines. So I think our field is changing. I think you would agree with this, Jay, that I see a point in the future where pretty much every breast cancer patient, men and women, early or late stage, will probably get tested. Because even though it's not that common, even if you find one patient, that could make a difference.
Well, not only that, Ben, but the cost of doing the testing is dropping so dramatically. I mean,
it's like $100 to a couple $100 now.
Yeah.
Thank God.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Wow.
And so,
not for somatic is still pretty expensive, but most of the companies offering somatic will provide you with some sort of a subsidy.
That's exactly right. And they, a lot of the companies right now, including the ones we're working with, they'll pretty much waive the cost if your insurance doesn't cover it.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, they are working with all of us.
Peggy, one more thing on that. If you have Medicare, either through disability or you're over 65, then you can get one somatic test for any particular cancer during your lifetime.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, right now it's only one, and but Medicare will cover a somatic test for you.
So I will,
Good question.
I work with several of these companies, but the one that we're now changing to here at Vanderbilt, they don't care if you're a Medicare patient or not anymore. And if you get a second test within a year or 18 months, it's on them. It's free. It's all part of it.
Oh, great.
And again, their financial assist is amazing. This is part of why I'm working with them, because they do a much more comprehensive panel. They'll do germline filtering, which is what I was talking about, so we can figure out what's in the tumor and what's not. And it's a $1,800 test, but again, no patient will really pay more than $100 max. Our first 10 patients were $0 to the patient. So
Fantastic.
we're getting the data back. Now, the proviso to this is, but I will tell you, this company called Tempus, they're much more upfront about it, but all companies are doing this. We're going to be, I think, just open and transparent and forefronts of disclosure. These companies are selling the data. And so we're upfront about this and consenting, and we're saying, okay, they're going to take your de-identified data and they're going to sell it to companies because that's their monetization scheme. So most of these companies are not making any money on the tests. It's this idea that they're going to sell the data.
Right.
We're okay with it for this company because they have unrestricted use when they give us the data back. So we can still use it and contribute it to the general world population.
To the
That's how we're going to make a difference.
That's amazing.
Ben, let me. I'm sorry, Jim. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Question on timing. So, it's like classic oncologist that I go to says, we got to pick and choose when we do this because we might only get one chance through your insurance kind of thing to get the data. So, if you go for somatic testing, as you know, it can change and it will change. The fact is cancer mutates. So when you do it, here I am, I'm in a clinical study, take it personal. I'm on a PARP inhibitor and I'm on an immunotherapy, as you and I have discussed, Dr. Park.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, I'm going to probably fail this at some point. And when do you actually go and do genetic testing? When right now I'm stable, so there's no reason in their mind to do genetic testing yet because we're not moving to another modality.
Correct. I actually think that's very reasonable because you're probably not going to get much different results if you did it right now compared to the first time. What we really want to focus on and I'm hoping we don't have to focus on because this would be a great problem. But if you progress, trying to get that progressive lesion biopsied or do what, is my expertise of and research is cell-free DNA or liquid biopsy to try to figure out, hey, what is it about your tumor that is now resisting your current therapy? Because if we could understand that, we potentially could attack it. And that's where I think having serial biopsies will really make a lot of difference. Lung cancer has really led this field. As an example, we know that there are about 10% of lung cancers that have a certain type of mutation in a gene called EGFR. It is actually also called HER1, so we all know about HER2 for breast cancer, but this is HER1. And so HER1 antibody therapies exist, but there's also these pills that are very, very effective. These were in the early 2000s. But now we actually know a lot of the drug resistance mechanisms, and we've overcome them with second and third generation drugs, and now we're seeing different types of resistance. So it turns out when you progress on one of these therapies, you can get one of these tissue or liquid biopsies, and you may find something, in a particular case that we just discussed at my molecular tumor board, amplification and overexpression of a gene called MET. Well, it turns out we actually have a MET inhibitor called crizotinib. And my lung cancer colleague, we were on this virtual global international molecular tumor board that I know some of you I've told you about before. And they just did in Singapore, where this case was presented, they just did what the report says. This is the danger of sequencing and these reports. They're not medical experts who are writing these reports. And so this is what I created at Hopkins and now really expanded on steroids here at Vanderbilt is content expertise. To bring together the world's experts in a call like this or in a room to really discuss these reports because the companies get it wrong half the time. Yes. And so it turns out that my lung colleague at University of Pittsburgh, he was someone I knew at Hopkins before that, and I'd seen this already before at Hopkins too, he said, no, you got to give both drugs. You'll never get a response unless you give both drugs. And it turns out the guy had already switched him on therapy. He said, yeah, we're not really seeing anything. So he's going to switch him on both drugs. It's incredibly important. This is such a new field. There just aren't many people who are well-versed in cancer genetics, genomics, and oncology that it's incredibly important. If you guys get one of these tests, send it to me or someone who really understands this stuff, because otherwise I worry in fear, honestly, every night that we're missing things that we could help patients with or that patients are getting inappropriate therapies based upon because the doctor doesn't understand and just says, oh, this report tells me I should do X, Y, and Z. That is not, to me, the right way to do it.
Yeah, Ben, I mean, that is an absolutely spectacular overview of that. My feeling is, I don't know if it'll be 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 8 years from now, but we'll be talking about molecular subtypes of cancer more than the name of the cancer, if you will.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the greatest success stories in this, and I've shared this at various venues here, is this little Bangladeshi girl who had juvenile secretory breast carcinoma, extremely rare, usually cured by surgery, but she was misdiagnosed, had a number of recurrent metastatic lesions to her lungs. She had no chance of surviving with chemo or radiation. And I happen to be the only geeky molecular oncologist on this virtual breast tumor board run out of MGH, and happened to also be on the SAB of Loxo Oncology, which had this drug that affected with NTRK translocations. And you guys have seen this. This girl came to MSK for the trial, had a mass this big, widespread lung metastasis, and just melted away. And she's living today, popping a pill in Bangladesh. It's just an incredible story. And so that's where, again, you need to, and that's what I'm trying to build here. My goal is that every patient in this country and eventually the world, they will have access to this type of content expertise and testing. It's going to take us a while to get there, but man, how great would that be?
It's amazing for both of you doctors to lend us your time, because we know how precious it is, to even think about helping our men. Because I emailed Dr. Ben, I emailed Dr. Harness, information from the guys with their medical reports and stuff, and you guys are right back on it to help these men, and we can't thank you all enough because it's amazing.
Well, let me tell you something. It's my privilege, and it's my passion as well, and it's true for Ben. I can tell that. So Ben, what you just bought yourself by you and I meeting today, you just bought yourself 1, 2, maybe 3 interviews with me at Breast Cancer Answers.
Yeah.
You are spectacular. you are the kind of guy that I may get on once a month for breaking news and medical oncology.
Oh, I agree.
Not
Making me
only
blush.
no, man, not only are you smart, but you can talk in language that people can understand.
Yes.
So
Well, listen,
Ben,
I am
congratulations on
humbled and
what you're
honored
doing.
by that, but I think as many people on this call know, this is why we're here, right? I
Yes,
really feel
Yes.
like
right.
we were put on this earth for a purpose, and my purpose is to help as many people as I can. And
Yeah,
I'm
And God
speaking with,
bless you all. So
I'm
it helps our guys get answers. So we've got 4 of our survivors on here. Any other questions that you all would like to ask
yes,
our
please.
esteemed
please.
people? Ron?
Can you? Well, I just wanted to thank Dr. Park for all he did for me when I had questions and concerns. And I unfortunately got on this call a little bit late. So, but I'm picking it up, and I just wanted to thank him for all he does for us.
Yeah, I agree.
You bet.
Well,
And
thank you very
we've
much,
got it
Ron.
recorded too. So Ron, you'll get to hear it all.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, it's been an honor and a pleasure.
Peggy, can I just mention to you gents here, and I know you're going to send it out, that next
Right.
Monday,
Oh, yes, please.
yeah, and I maybe Dr. Park and Dr. Harness are interested here too. Next Monday, we're going to be very privileged to have Dr. Larry Fung do a webinar for us.
Oh, wow.
Larry, I go back quite a long ways with Larry. He's on our advisory board, and I can say from my heart that I love him dearly. He is not only one of the smartest docs in the immunology field, but he's also one of the most compassionate, and I've seen that in his clinical practice. And he's going to do a webinar for us at 8 o'clock Eastern. You'll join exactly the same way as you join this. And he's going to talk a little bit about immuno-oncology and kind of explain it to those who are on the call. And then he'll take questions. The questions can be specific to a particular type of cancer. He's not going to answer questions about your own case. As you know, the docs cannot really do that in this environment. But having said that, I think it'll be a really good session. I've heard him do this before for Cancer Research Institute, and he has that same ability that Ben has to sort of dumb it down to a level where we can all understand whilst insulting no one. So please join us on Monday night. And Peggy will send
Yeah, I'll get it all out to everybody. So
okay. And Peggy, make sure that I've got Dr. Park's contact information.
yes, I've already
Plus,
connected you all.
yeah, and so also for you, I don't have phone numbers and things like that if I need to call you. When I discovered the browser thing wasn't right, I was emailing you, but then
Yeah.
you sent out a new blast that said, "Oh, by the way,
Wrong.
here's the right browser connection."
I connected it wrong.
Can I ask one last question while we're all on, rather than emailing Dr. Park?
Yeah.
My question has to do with diet, and my question specifically has to do with some of the metabolic work that's been going on at the University of Florida and a few other places with Rona Patrick and a few other people on fasting and more of the going into ketogenic style diets in cancer.
Yep.
And there seems to be more and more coming out. I just wanted to know if anything's going on in either of your realms, doctors, where you're seeing some interesting results.
I would echo what Dr. Harness said earlier. Studies have clearly shown maintaining an ideal body weight, exercise, healthy living basically, really increases longevity, decreases the risk of recurrence in early stage disease. And these are all things that, even though they sound very common sense, a lot of people still don't do or follow through. But if you look at data curves about exercise, and some of my colleagues at Hopkins, this was kind of one of their big areas of research interest, it's pretty dramatic. It's as good in some studies as any kind of chemotherapy adjuvant study. So I always try to counsel my patients on maintaining a healthy diet, seeing a trainer if they can't do it on their own, because this is really, I think, a powerful way for patients to take control of doing something beyond the chemo, beyond the hormone therapy and everything else, that they could really have a positive benefit. Not to mention all the other health benefits from, maintaining a healthy style of living on cardiovascular disease, et cetera.
I was going beyond that. I was going to whole insulin metabolism and
Also, that is a big area right now.
all the things that are coming out.
We don't know 100% for sure, Jim, how effective that's going to be. And it may be, getting back to what I was talking about earlier, the differences between an individual's cancer and what genes are mutated and hit. As an example, one of the genes that we kind of put on the map in 2004 is a gene called PIK3CA. This is mutated in about 30 to 40% of breast cancers totally, and maybe 40 to 50% in all estrogen receptor positive breast cancers. And fast forward to this year, there's finally a drug from Novartis. I don't know if this is going to be widespread, but it's not the greatest drug. It has a lot of toxicity, but it is a drug against patients now who have metastatic breast cancer that have this mutation, HER2 negative. And it's kind of based on the metabolism. This is an incredibly important gene and therefore protein for insulin metabolism. And that's actually where a lot of the side effects come in from the drug, because what this drug's biggest side effect is it blocks insulin signaling. And so patients get diabetic, basically. And so the next challenge is to really dial that down and figure out how to attack just the cancer cells that have this mutation. In a similar but different vein, there are a lot of cancers, like certain leukemias and brain cancers, that have a gene and a mutation in a gene called IDH1 or IDH2. This is a metabolism gene. It actually is involved with how our cells use and create energy. And so now there are drugs that attack that and prevent it from actually creating what we call an oncometabolite, which basically means it creates a different protein or a different substrate that is advantageous for the cancer cell to live. And so now we have inhibitors in clinical trials that can try to block that area of metabolism. And then most recently, some of my own work that just got published, there are rare breast cancers that have mutations in what we call spliceosome genes. You don't have to know what that is. The bottom line is that when we did some digging, we found out that cancers and breast cancers as well that have mutations in these genes, they end up screwing up serine metabolism. So serine is what we call a non-essential amino acid, meaning that if you don't get it from your diet, there's this protein that can convert various things into serine so the cells can live. Well, it turns out that protein gets altered in breast cancer and other cancer cells that have this mutation. And that presented us with this therapeutic opportunity, which we're going to put into clinical trials. And that is, if you have that protein gone, that means serine is no longer a non-essential amino acid. It becomes an essential amino acid. If you don't have it in your diet, the cells will die. And here we're talking just the cancer cells. So this is a great, hugely insightful story from one of my former fellows who really drove this. And we showed that in animal models and preclinical models, if a cell has a normal cell and its counterpart has this mutation, you serine starve this, the cancer cells die, but the normal cells won't. So we're going to put this into a clinical trial and see whether or not we can augment therapies based upon metabolism. But I think, getting back to your point, Jim, I believe that it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. We have to examine the genetics of the cancer, figure out if there's kind of chinks in the armor with metabolism, and then see if we have drugs that can actually attack it, or doing things like ketogenic diet, or in our case, serine deprivation diet. There's lots of stuff going on in that field. None of it, I think, right now is ready for prime time that says, aha, it's definitive.
Yeah, Jim, if you go to Breast Cancer Answers YouTube channel, and then when you land on the homepage, click to where it says videos, and you'll see the 3 recent interviews I did with Gordon Sachs, who's an MD PhD, runs the integrative nutrition program at UC San Diego. This came up, I think, in the last interview that we did, particularly just before chemotherapy, that going into a starvation state
Right.
may in fact enhance how some chemotherapies work. But listen to Dr. Park. What I said a minute ago is really true. We really need to know the molecular subtypes of what we're dealing with here, and one size doesn't fit all. As I've been saying for years, these cancers is a huge galaxy. We're now starting to sort out the subtypes, and as Ben is pointing out, we're going to be targeting toward those specific subtypes. Anyway, Ben, I cannot wait. It'll probably be sometime in October to get started with you. But people, one of my favorite expressions is people need to hear what you have to say.
Yes.
I don't
Totally
think my
agree.
wife would agree with that.
No, we do. We
Uh,
do totally agree.
All right, you guys. My pleasure and privilege to be with you today.
Well,
Yeah.
we can't thank you all. So remember to mark your calendars. We'll send this out. I'm going to send out the actual link to this call to everyone in the, as far as the men. And please, Dr. Harness and Dr. Park, we would love for you to be here in April. And we'll let.
I got it marked down. I may not be for the whole thing, but I'm going to come.
That's cool. That's all we care. This is just wonderful. So God bless you all. And we thank you for your time.
All right.
My privilege. Bye-bye, everybody. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Guys.